Hi, it's Sean, and you're listening to The 3-Month Vacation. Would you launch a project that took 8 hours a week and had no guarantee of success? Back in 2014, that's November 2014, we embarked on a slightly crazy mission. We decided we were going to start up a podcast without realizing what we were up against. Almost immediately, we ran into trouble. We didn't have all the equipment needed, not enough knowledge of post-processing or editing, and yet those were minor issues. The biggest problem of all was that a 30-minute podcast often took 8 hours to produce. To add to this mix of uncertainty, we had no idea if anyone would listen. And if they did listen, how would that translate into greater sales or additional clients? This is the creator's eternal dilemma, isn't it? Almost all of us don't shrink away from hard work. Yet we crave that dollop of predictability. In the case of the podcast, there were no such guarantees. At some point, we just had to decide to go ahead with the project, knowing fully well that we would have to keep going for at least a year. Then, all of a sudden, 10 years pass. Or 21 years, if you're looking at 5000 BC. That's our membership site. When we started with 5000 BC, we had no intention of doing anything special or even spectacular. The first version of 5000 BC was simply a blog. You could ask questions on that blog, and then I answered those questions in great detail. The fee for the membership site was just $8.95. That's not for a month, but for the entire year, which, as you can tell, isn't a whole deal of revenue. Yet 21 years later, the membership site is still chugging along nicely, generating a substantial amount of income and creating a small, tight-knit community. This same concept applied to the article writing course. When we started the article writing course, I had no idea that anybody would be interested. In fact, the discussions that I had with my wife Renuka were probably nobody's interested, but let's just put up a sales page. Let's do some pre-selling and see what happens. And maybe nobody will sign up this year, but possibly next year. So it was a big surprise when people did sign up. Almost all our projects, the cartooning course, the storytelling course, and several of the workshops that we've had, including this new Paris strategy workshop that we had a few months ago, in Paris, France, of course, we didn't know what the outcome was. But we had to set out on that journey. It wasn't just a random journey. There is a certain amount of planning. And then there is the obvious question, where do you get the clients? Just creating something doesn't mean that you're going to get clients. Everybody knows this to be true. If you look at the author Dan Brown, his first book didn't do so well. The second book, not so good either. He was at the point of despair. He thought, this is all I can do, and if nobody's reading, then maybe I'm not a good writer. And he wrote the third book, The Da Vinci Code, and that's when things started to take off. Not only did the Da Vinci Code become an international bestseller, but the first two books, those books that weren't selling, they outsold the Da Vinci Code. We don't know the answer to where to get clients because it's always a shifting landscape, and it's different for every single person. But what we do know is that once you start a project, you have to go for a very long time. Suddenly, 10 or 20 years pass. Suddenly, you have 500 plus podcasts. Quite as suddenly, you have 200,000 posts in the forum and the membership site. One course leads to another, and you have a sense of leverage that you've never thought of, you've not expected. Life has no guarantees, and business certainly has no guarantees. But what we have to do is we have to start something. Not in March next year, not in July, but now. Just like we did in November 10 years ago. And that's why you're listening to this podcast. One random tiny decision, and then sustaining that activity for the longest time possible. And if you have any doubts about how the podcast has changed, go back and listen to some of the earliest episodes, like episode 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you'll see the difference. This is what you have to do. Start now, keep going, and yes, you have to go and find some clients because somebody has to listen to it. Somebody has to buy into things. That'll happen. And that brings us to the end of this podcast. Yes, I know it's a short one, but we've been away in France for well over 40 days, and it's really hard to get back to work, let alone get back to work in December, when most of New Zealand is clearing out and going on holiday. I will be back to tell you some stories of our vacation, and I hope you enjoy them. But I'll say bye for now. Bye-bye. Still listening? This concept of starting up something tiny and then sustaining it isn't just with my work. In 2010, I went to a watercolor class, and I wanted to improve my watercolor painting. The teacher said, do something every day, and I couldn't figure out what I could do on a daily basis. So I just started to create a little diary of something that happened during the day. Now I have over 4,500 paintings, and I'm very good at watercolor painting. What I am hopeless at is speaking French. But I've started. It's been about 150 days. I'll keep going and going and going. And I hope that you'll join me on some kind of journey like that as well. Bye for now.